So for someone who doesn't really know a lot about opera, or maybe has never even seen one actually, what is the process like of developing a production? Like, especially for you as the singer, where do you start? Do you start with learning the lyrics, or like the arias in general one by one, or do you start with the staging? Where do you start?
Sure. So first thing to know is that, like, generally speaking, a production starts with the opera house. They choose these operas. Sometimes they have singers in mind for the roles. Hopefully they do, so that they don't have to scramble for singers. But then they find singers to fill those certain positions. And of course, there's all these staff and crew who are building sets and all this stuff way before we even get to the first day of rehearsal. And even then I know, okay, in 2025, I'm doing my first Otello. And so I'm going to start planning to work on it in 2023, somewhere in the third quarter of the year, so that I have a full year to kind of work it in when I have it time in my schedule. And so there's all kinds of things that go into it. But for me as a singer, I mean, when I know I'm going to do a project, then I always try to find the source material for the text. So there's a libretto that we're singing, of course, but that all usually comes from some sort of play or book. So if you take Carmen, for instance, there's a book called Carmen, and you have a lot of information in that book that's not in the opera. You know, they actually start the opera like a third of the way into the book.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Before he even meets Carmen. In fact, the story is not even about Carmen so much as it's about Don Jose.
Yeah.
So for me, as the person who plays Don Jose, you start to say, oh, wow, this is my story.
Yeah.
And you start to realize that the journey, even throughout the opera, is his story. He meets this woman who literally says constantly, I'm never going to change. And that's what happens. She doesn't change. She just dies. And that's it. That's it from beginning to end, you know? And it's a fascinating way to look at things. So when you get the source material, you have that background, you have that knowledge. Some directors let you use it. Hopefully they do. And sometimes they don't want you to. They want to just take the text and turn it around and do some new thing, which is also interesting, but also a little bit more challenging. So anyway, I do that first. I go through that and I kind of find the points that I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting moment. I wonder if that correlates. Then I read the libretto of the score, and I'm translating every single word by one word at a time, word by word, and doing all the IPA. I put all the International Phonetic Alphabet in there, so I know, oh, I have to make sure I use a closed vowel there, not open. Yeah, just little reminders so that when you're working in the score, you don't have to think about it in that moment so fast. You have, oh, there's a note there. Okay, yeah. And your body starts to remember to do that. So yeah, it always starts with the text. And then the best thing to do, and hopefully everybody has the time to do this all the time, is to say the text as if you would say it in a conversation.
Dialogue, yeah.
Yeah. And then try and put it to the musical notes that have been written for it, especially if you're doing like recitativo, where it sounds like da 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 da, and you're like, that doesn't sound like anything I would say, you know? So you want to think about, why did the composer use those note values? Okay, maybe we can, use this, and that makes sense. Okay, but then you get to the music. Then you get to the parts of actually learning the notes and putting the words to the music, and it's just tons of stuff. I put beat markings in my score, so I'm always following the conductor, and I know where. Especially in your first musical rehearsal, I like to be like super prepared. So if a conductor says, we're going to start at the fifth beat of a 6/8 that's being beaten 6, and you're like, okay, I know where that is because I put that beat marking in there. Or it's just something crazy like that. You just always know. Not a lot of music doesn't get beat like that, but it's just a good kind of reference to how it goes.
Sure.
Anyway, that's the part that gets me to the first rehearsal, which usually is a music rehearsal. Sometimes it's a staging rehearsal, depending on if the conductor's arriving on time. Also you have people coming from all over the world and meeting each other, sometimes for the first time. Sometimes I see the same people regularly. It's a strange business in that way, but sometimes it feels like you just saw them yesterday, even it could be 2 years earlier.
Yeah.
We just have that kind of personality trait, I think, inside of us. I think it's what makes us performers too. I've heard like movie actors who work together once in a while, and they're like, oh, it's just like we met each other yesterday again, So it's just a common thing with performers. But anyway, do you want me to go further into the production? Because then we do staging and music.
I was wondering how long you actually have time to rehearse together at the end of it.
That's a very good question. It changes. Some houses in Europe are considered repertory houses, and they put on the same 20 operas a year, and then they add in some new productions. Like the Metropolitan Opera even is one that does that, but they are in America and they want more rehearsal. In Germany, sometimes you go in, you have a day of rehearsal, 3 days of rehearsal, and you're thrown on stage. I only do that with operas. I only do that with operas I've done for the first time already, so that I've already got a great idea of what the character does. And in general, if the staging's different, as long as the intentions are the same, it's really easy to plug in where you have to be, because you already have the reason in your brain for why you're going there. So anyway, that's part of it. Sometimes for new productions, I've had 6 weeks of rehearsal. It's just really, it's up to the directors, it's up to the management, how long they want to have people around. Nowadays, because there's not a lot of money out there in opera, and for instance, like people are being paid the same amount in opera today that they were being paid almost 30 years ago. And that means that there's less of a budget for people to pay for their bills. So they need to work more often and in shorter periods. So people are popping in, doing 5 performances of something after 2 days of rehearsal, and then going off to the next gig and off to the next gig and off to the next gig. And it's just part of the way we have to be today. We have to be on planes constantly and ready to go and jump into the next production.